like you for everybody, the Zoom, and
Oh,
even,
yeah.
even the people who are.
Okay, everyone, welcome. Welcome to this special webinar. My name is Dr. Stephen Sussman, and I am a professor of public administration at Barry University in Miami and co-founder of the Palm Beach Center for Democracy and Policy Research. Dr. Luis Fleischman and I, along with a team of dedicated colleagues, created and established the center as an outlet for the marketplace of ideas. The Palm Beach Center, if I ask everyone to please mute yourself while we're doing this. Thank you very much. The Palm Beach Center for Democracy and Policy Research is a nonpartisan public policy organization, a research center, and a think tank. We are a gathering of scholars, experts, and community stakeholders engaged in research and dialogue in an effort to create practical policy recommendations to current local, national, and international challenges. Therefore, the center encourages discussion and research from multiple perspectives. We believe that good policy is the result of reasonable dialogue and healthy debate. We believe in the marketplace of ideas. Thus, through publishing balanced articles and community engagement, the center aspires to provide a platform for critical thinking, analysis, and ideas to confront challenges that affect our world. So please visit our website at palmbeachdemocracy.org. This event is co-sponsored with the World Affairs Council of Palm Beach County. Celeste Simon, the CEO of the World of, too much beeping in the background. People, please mute your phones, your computers. This event is co-sponsored with the World Affairs Council of Palm Beach County. Celeste Simon, the CEO of the World Affairs Council, will tell you about her organization and the wonderful work it does in an effort to promote a better understanding of politics, economies, and cultures. Celeste, if you'd like to say a few words, and then I'll pick up after you're finished.
Okay, just a few words. Yes, we're a nonprofit organization, and we have wonderful members, and we have programs for high school students and college students, and we bring in experts from around the world, really, to speak on global issues, and also have wonderful local speakers. And I want to say
Hold on. I think we lost her.
We did.
She put herself on mute.
Where is she? I can't even see her here. Celeste. Oh,
Yeah,
there you are. Okay, okay.
She has to unmute herself.
Unmute yourself, Celeste.
am I unmuted again?
Yes, you're unmuted. Go ahead. Sorry.
Anyway, did you hear that I'm very thankful, actually, that you, Dr. Sussman, and Luis founded this Center for Democracy and Policy Research, because I think it's very beneficial for our area to have a think tank. And I just wanted to make sure that everybody is well aware of the fact that it's a very special thing to have a think tank locally, and that all of us should avail ourselves of what the wonderful topics and all of the wonderful presentations that they are giving and will continue to give. And I want to say one more thing. I want to say hello to Dr. Rabil. Hello, Robert. Mm-hmm. he's muted, I think. Anyway, I wanted to thank you, Dr. Rabil, for a wonderful presentation that you gave to our council this past March. And I know that all of us at the World Affairs Council are waiting for you to come back and speak to us again. Stephen, back to you.
Thank you, Celeste. Thank you very much for those kind words, and thank you for your involvement with our organization, and thank you for all you do for the World Affairs Council. Tonight's event is an excellent example of why the center exists. We're so honored to host Dr. Josef Olmert and Dr. Rabil. Many of you know Dr. Rabil from South Florida. He's also internationally renowned, as is Dr. Olmert, who's at the University of South Carolina. However, before I turn this over to Luis Fleischman, who will formally introduce our panel, I have some administrative requests. After our guests complete their presentations, we will open the floor for your questions. To ask a question, you can click on the raised hand icon, or you can write your opinion or your question, I should say, in the chat box. You can also email me your question at shim613@gmail.com, shim613@gmail.com. Now I turn it over to Dr. Fleischman for the formal introductions.
Terrific. Well, thank you so much, Steve, and thank you. I mean, I'm really excited to see so many people, and I think we are a full house today. I think probably it's the largest event we have had. We are having now an average of, during the COVID, the pandemic, we are having an average of one event every 2 weeks. And this is probably the most attended so far. The next one probably is going to be about cybersecurity, another very important subject matter. We will be confirming it in the days and weeks ahead. Just one thing I want to say about the program today. I will say a few words about this panel. Then I will introduce the speakers. The speakers will speak. We will have some questions from me, the moderator, and then the audience can ask questions. You can ask the questions by approaching the microphone, namely unmuting yourself, or you can approach it by, or you can actually send the question via chat, right? You have the chat, you know how to type your question. In any event, I know Steve will take note of the questions, we'll read them. If not, you can approach the microphone. I think if you approach the microphone, makes it everything a little bit more dynamic and more active. I like it. About tonight, the Middle East continues to be an important subject matter and an important topic. Affect us all. The Middle East civil war continues, particularly in Syria and in Libya. The Syrian situation, we thought that at one point that the government of Bashar Assad was going to recover the territory that it lost during the civil war. However, Idlib, the bastion of the town of Idlib, still resists. It's a rebel bastion. And even towns that have supported Assad are now rebelling against the regime. So it doesn't look that the Syrian civil war is going to end anytime soon. At the same time, we are seeing a very rare open alliance between Egypt, the Gulf countries, and Israel against the growing aggression of Iran. Iran continues aggressive policies, destabilizing policies in Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, and Yemen in an effort to gain regional influence, but it has been severely weakened by sanctions and by a number of explosions in military facilities and nuclear plants in what seems to be sabotage, even though so far nobody actually took responsibility except some marginal groups. It's an interesting case. We hope to hear about it tonight. Turkey is emerging as an ominous new Islamist power, trying to renew Turkish neo-Ottoman dominance of the Arab world. It has sided with Iran, with the Muslim Brotherhood that is no longer in power in Egypt, and even with some terrorist groups such as Hamas, not to speak about some logistical collaboration with ISIS. The United States seems to be indifferent or withdrawing from the Middle East, while Russia is trying to increase its influence in Syria and seems to be the go-to address when Israel wants to deal with Iran and Hezbollah's threat from Syrian territory. China seems to be emerging as an economic powerhouse to rescue Iran and also to increase its political influence in the region. What does it mean for America and the Middle East? All these questions will be discussed tonight. So I would like to introduce now the speakers. Let me start with Robert Rabil. Just 1 second. Just 1 second. Robert Rabil is a professor of political science at Florida Atlantic University. He received his PhD in Near Eastern and Judaic Studies from Brandeis University. His area of studies and expertise include political Islam, Salafism, transnational and revivalist movements, terrorism, US-Arab relations, Arab-Israeli conflict, the US-Muslim relations, and contemporary Middle East politics. He's the author of dozens of articles in major academic and professional journals and magazines. His books have been peer-reviewed and highly commended. By the way, I think Robert has about 5 books written. I have read some of them, are terrific books. Dr. Rabil served as the chief of emergency for the Red Cross in Baabda district in Beirut during the Lebanon Civil War, and was a project manager for the US State Department funded Iraq Research and Documentation Project. He has an excellent career as a professor and several awards, honorable awards. Dr. Josef Olmert is a top Middle East scholar, former peace negotiator, much published author and journalist. He's currently an adjunct professor at the University of South Carolina. And prior to this, he and the international academic teaching career, he had an international academic teaching career in Israel, Canada, and the United States, where he taught at the City University of New York, Cornell University, and American University. In Israel, he headed the Syrian and Lebanon desk at Tel Aviv University's Moshe Dayan Center for Middle Eastern and African Studies, where he served on the faculty. Now, I have to say something about both these speakers. With Robert, I have had a very long-standing relation, probably almost 20 years since he moved to Florida to substitute, I would say, Walid Fares, who is also a national star today. And I am very impressed with Robert. Robert is a terrific, insightful scholar, and you will see that tonight. Josef Olmert, very interesting because we became friends later in the United States, but the first time I met Josef Olmert was through TV. I was then a young soldier living in Israel, coming from the Lebanese war, and there was a new program hosted by a famous journalist in Israel called Dan Margalit, and I think his first guest was the young Josef Olmert. And I think I'm talking about the year 1982, I believe, right? Or 1982,
yeah.
Yeah, that was a long time ago, when we were both young.
Not nice to divulge my age in this opportunity, but
yes,
that's okay.
Yes, the young Josef Olmert. So for those of you who don't know, Josef is also the brother of a former Israeli prime minister, and probably an historical prime minister, because he made an offer to Mahmoud Abbas that was extremely generous for a final peace agreement with the Palestinians that was rejected by the leader of the Palestinian Authority. So without further ado, I call on Dr. Olmert to speak first, to be followed by Dr. Rabil.
Thank you very much. And it is really a pleasure to talk in this forum. And the main reason really is that you exist, that this center exists. And I have the honor of being a senior fellow here. We live in dark ages in which academic freedom is in danger, in which the freedom to express opinions that may not be in line with political correctness is in danger. And therefore, the very existence of this center is a blessing. And Stephen, Louis, Brett, and others, and of course the World Affairs Council that is co-sponsoring tonight, you have to be congratulated for the initiative. And it's a great pleasure also to talk alongside Robert Rabil, who is a great expert on Lebanon and other issues. Lebanon is a country that I've dealt with, as you heard, from different perspectives. throughout all my academic and governmental and public service career. So let's get into the Middle East, and we'll start with a more historic comment. I'm an historian by profession, so I always look at the past in order to learn about the present and the future. So we used to talk in the about the Middle East until the First World War about the Eastern question, which was the question of what would happen if and when the Ottoman Empire would collapse and the Middle East would become a zone of conflict that would spill over to Europe. It became a big issue in international relations. I think that we can speak today about the modern day Eastern question, which is how come that the post-World War I and II arrangements that were supposed to organize or reorganize the Middle East have to a large extent, but not completely, but to a large extent collapsed. And what we see now is a situation whereby there are so many points of crisis, civil wars, conflicts that are different from one place to another, but they still have some common denominators. And this is why we can talk, therefore, about a systemic problem or a regional problem. And the first problem that we have to understand here is that a lot of the states that were established in the Middle East were really artificial entities. They did not reflect historic legacies. They did not reflect the desires of people concerned or involved with. They did not have boundaries which were according to demographic, ethnic, and religious criteria. They created all kinds of states that used to have issues of instability that were really chronic. For a long time, about 3 decades, from say the late 1960s or early 1970s to 28, 29, 2010, of course, the Arab Spring, 2011, it seemed that the question of instability in a lot of those countries was resolved. And many people in the West congratulated themselves for the idea that, well, finally we found out a solution to the Middle East issues among Arabs, I mean. I will get to the Arab-Israeli conflict momentarily, because, okay, we don't like this regime or that regime, but you know what, there is stability there, and stability, therefore, the team that was praised. But all this, of course, was brought down after 2011, and the dilemma, therefore, between stability, human rights, Western-type democracy, all these issues resurfaced in a way that indicates that there seems to be a real deep crisis in the very essence of what a state is in the Middle East, what really forms statehood. Therefore, really are conflicts that are having to do with religion, the religious issue between Sunnis and Shias. There's nothing new about that. It's new for the Western world, but it's not new in the Middle East. I remember that one time in 2007, during the situation in Iraq, Newsweek, at that time still existing full-fledged, they sent a correspondent to Baghdad to find out what was going on. Why are they killing each other, Sunnis and Shias? So a taxi driver told the correspondent, what are you even asking? We have done it to each other for 1,400 days. You just know about it now. So we see sectarianism resurfacing. It used to be a problem in Lebanon mainly. It has become a problem all over the Middle East, the Sunni Shias, what they call now the sushi war, Sunni Shias. By the way, it's a term that was first invented by an Arab American writer. So we have a question of the inability of state to create a modus of relationship between majority and minority populations. You look at Yemen, Sunni Shias, you look at Iraq, Sunnis, Shias, Kurds, you look at Syria, obviously, you look at Lebanon, you look at Libya also. The West and the East are fighting each other, and there is a lot of tribalism involved. And in some other countries where it is yet to resurface in a big way, you also see the seeds of this type of conflict. So first of all, we see a crisis in the sense that the very notion of what should be a Middle East state or the statehood in the Middle East is really in a deep crisis, is under a lot of pressure, and there should be found some kind of a new formula. Now, we don't have time in this particular event to get into all the reasons and to all the possible solutions, but the problem is there. The problem is that the very notion of what a state is not so clear to many people in the Middle East. And then, of course, it creates issues that are having to do with the implications over other parts of the world. Take the question of migration from the Middle East. So, you know, I have the pleasure or the privilege, I should say, of having people from all kinds of countries in the world coming to my classes at the University of South Carolina. And when you talk to people from Germany, from Italy, from France, from Switzerland, from even Scandinavian countries, they tell you, look, we have a lot of migrants from the Middle East. What's going on in your part of the world? Instead of oil, migration of human people has become the main export of many Middle Eastern countries. And therefore, the question of the instability in the Middle East is becoming an issue which is now assuming international, mainly European proportions. In Germany alone, you have over 1 million, maybe 1.5 million Syrian immigrants only in Germany, let alone millions of others that came there even before. So this question, therefore, is becoming beyond just the area of the Middle East. And let me throw another element here that might be more like a projection for the future. So just imagine that we continue with the current trend in which the dependence of the world, the Western world and other parts of the world on Middle East oil is decreasing or continues to decrease. You will see more and more migration from the countries that even today seem to be more stable or still more viable economically in the Gulf and all that, because they really depend mostly, not totally, mostly on the question of oil. So we can see a problem here which is really becoming a major issue in international relations altogether. But there are elements of this situation which ought to be mentioned, and one of them is, so what is the Middle East crisis? So, you know, I'll tell you what I do in my classes. The first class is always asking my 50, 60 students, tell me, when you hear the words Middle East, what is immediately the something that comes to your mind? And don't think about it, just spontaneously say, what is it? So almost all of them say instability, civil wars, religion, fanaticism, tension. Maybe 2 or 3 maybe mention the Arab-Israeli conflict or the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. So one of the main issues that are emerging out is, and maybe it's not an issue, maybe from an Israeli perspective, from the perspective of those who are pro-Israel, is a blessing. When we talk today about the Middle East crisis, what crisis are we talking about? We hardly talk about the Arab-Israeli conflict, and in that case also the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It is definitely not the one issue that is in the center of instability and tensions in the Middle East, far from it. And most of the countries of the Middle East, Arab countries as well, of course, they are in one kind or another of relationship with Israel. I just read yesterday an article by a Saudi commentator who used to be, by the way, the Director General of Al Arabiya, Abd al-Rahman Rashad, in which he says, who are the 2 enemies of the Arabs? Turkey and Iran. So he didn't even mention the Arab-Israeli conflict. Israel was not mentioned. And you see much more of it, which also indicates something else. Here is a symbolic example of the weakness of the Arab political system. The 2 main countries that really affect politics today in the Middle East are Iran, the leader of the Shia Muslim world, and Turkey, which is in one way or another trying to revive some kind of regional domination or influence in the Middle East. And interestingly enough, these 2 countries, for this or that reason, are heavily involved in a country like Syria. Robert knows it, of course, very well. Syrians always like to pride themselves as being the heart of Arabism, the biting heart of Arabism, the center of Arab nationalism. Syria of the Ba'ath Party, Syria of the struggle against Israel, Syria of the championship of Palestinian rights, has become the playground of the Middle East, whereby seven, eight or nine different actors are doing more or less what they want to do in its territory. And two of the main actors are Turkey on the one side and Iran on the other side. So that's just another symbolic reminder of the weakness of the Arab system, as we can see in the case of Syria. If you take Libya, it's another example of that. And by the way, I just published through the center an article about the situation in Libya, in which I quoted some Turkish writers who are hesitating to say that we have a right to intervene in Libya because of the Ottoman legacy, but they basically say, they just don't say it in so specific terms. So what we see happening here is that there is a real struggle or a competition over the creation of a new Middle East. We are in a period of transition, therefore, in which we can see how the situation in the Middle East is evolving in a way that was hardly predicted a few years ago. Which brings me to another point that I think is very significant for American viewers in particular. If we look back at the Middle East of the 19th century, and obviously later on, we see that it has always been a case of Western attempts to educate the people of the Middle East, to reform the people of the Middle East, to show to them the fruits of Western democracy and all that comes with it. The Western world has miserably failed in doing it. Real change could come only from the people of the Middle East. How and circumstance, that's another question, but it cannot come by coercion or enforcement from the outside. This is one of the interesting lessons. And of course, since being an Israeli and all that, you can't imagine it. I will not say a few words about how Israel fits into all that. And I will restrict my comments to a couple of points that I also believe might trigger some questions. I'm not doing it deliberately to provoke questions, but I believe it will. Exactly because the Arab-Israeli conflict is disappearing, or at least is being reduced as being the main event of the Middle East, a real imaginative, original, inspirational Israeli foreign policy should be one that would not reignite this conflict. And why would I say it? Who needs now any talk about annexation of territories in Judea and Samaria or in the West Bank, in the disputed territories? The way we call them is up to each one. Why do we need to bring back the Arab-Israeli conflict to the forefront of the situation in the Middle East when it is not? It has to be part of our strategy. Let the other parties in the Middle East do what they do at any rate, and do not do things that will allow them to switch from what they do to each other, which is not against our interest, into dealing with us. I never believed that Prime Minister Netanyahu was serious about all this question of application of sovereignty or annexation, but I just mention it because I want to offer a point of thinking about strategic thinking for Israel at any rate, whether he meant it seriously or somebody else will do it in the future. The other point about Israel is I'm getting growingly worried about the fact that a strong base of support for Israel, the bipartisan support in the US, is crumbling. And we are, for this or that reason, it's not about blaming anyone, we are losing the support of a lot of the Democratic Party. I think that something has to be done about that. It has to be done on many levels. One of them is directly between Israel and Democrats in the US, but also between those who support Israel in the US and the Democratic Party. It should be done also on the part of those American Jews who are concerned about all that. But something has to be done about this, because I believe that bipartisan support in the US for Israel is a vital interest of the state of Israel. And it is something that could not be just being dismissed, and being abandoned and left for the future, so to speak. It has to be dealt with urgently. I'm being told by my sweetheart wife, Diana, who is sitting next to me, you don't see her, that I'm beyond my time. So I will end here and rest my case. And you are in for a great presentation now from our great colleague, Robert Rabil. Thank you.
Thank you, Yossi. Terrific. Robert, you're up. Oh, you have to unmute yourself. Let's see. Let's see if I could do it.
Can you hear
Okay.
me now? Well,
Yes, yes,
Yes, we
yes.
can.
Yossi, thank you for a very apt arguments, and thank you for a well-grounded presentation. And I don't know if I'm gonna trump you, so probably your presentation is better. Well, I have 15 minutes to speak about the Middle East, and as Yossi said, you know, we have many things that's happening. What I'm going to do is I'm gonna organize it into certain critical junctures by dates. But first, let me create the background. And the backgrounds, I'm gonna be speaking about it from the perspective of United States. When we look at the Middle East today, I would like you all to think that, you know, the Middle East is part of the global order. And that the global order, you know, is not part of the Middle East. So mainly when we look at the Middle East today, it's extremely important to reconcile the Middle East with our vision of our international arena or of the international world. And why I say that, because today when you look at the Middle East, you have to take into consideration what Russia is doing, what China is doing, and of course, what Turkey and Iran are doing, because today Turkey and Iran, they are making inroad in the Arab world. This is the first thing. Now, let me follow certain patterns. From the 1940 to 1967, really the predominant, you know, issue was the Arab-Israeli conflict. And along the Arab-Israeli conflict, you have Arab nationalism. And Arab nationalism came with a lot of aspiration to do well, to do this, to do that. Well, this has failed. 1967 came, humiliating defeat, and Arab nationalism was defeated. Now, what happened after 1967? Mainly, you know, one thing that happened, Islam is a solution. We tried all kinds of ism, communism, capitalism, Marxism, socialism, all failed. Islam is a solution. But then you have a trend. And that trend blended two things. It blended Islamism and authoritarianism. And with authoritarianism, I would speak about totalitarianism. So what did you have in the Middle East? In the Levant, you have totalitarianism as led by the Ba'ath Party. And in the conservative regimes, you have authoritarianism. But what happened during this time, extremely important to note, they destroyed the fabric of civil society. In the name of Arabism, there was no minority to speak with. Mainly, you know, you are Arab because we are told you are Arab. Minority suffered. And not only that, the whole Arab, you know, society suffered. In any country you wanna speak about it. Then, to move forward, you have the 1990. What happened in 1990? Another critical juncture in the Middle East. Mainly what happened is that with the invasion of Saddam Hussein of Kuwait, and for the first time ever in history, this is where Arab leaders or Arab countries really ganged up against Saddam Hussein. So mainly my point is, whatever illusion you had about Arab solidarity collapsed and was shattered. And then what did you have after that? From 1990 onward, not now, you have a receding of the Arab-Israeli conflict. The contacts between the Arabs and the Israeli, especially on the intelligence level, started to be and were led by Saudi here in Washington, D.C. from the 1990. And what happened alongside that, Islamism became a force. Islamism, Muslim Brothers, and radicalism as represented by Al-Qaeda and after by other radical organizations. This continued until 2003. In 2003, United States invaded Iraq. And what did we do? We shattered the regional order. There is no regional order. And something United States that failed to do. United States failed to build a new order in the Middle East. However you want to look at it, we failed. So what do you have now? You have all the regional countries and of course, international countries like Russia, not happy what happened to it in the 1990s. China that's moving in the Middle East, it's a source for its resources. What you have now, you have multifactorial issues that became involved in the Middle East. The Middle East was no longer confined to the Arab-Israeli conflict. The Middle East became an arena where regional countries were going to decide, and supplemented by international countries, especially Russia, less so United States, you know, in that what kind of an order they are going to have in the Middle East. Against this background, you have the Arab Spring. And the Arab Spring really was about many people that they were fed up with the society of the Arab world. And as I mentioned to you, those seeds that were planted in the 1940s, 50s, 60s, 70s, you know, it brought many Arabs who were unhappy. But that spring failed. And why it failed? Because of the authoritarianism and totalitarianism that did not allow the creation of a civil society, a working civil society, an active civil society, like in Israel or in every other part in the world. So what do you have? You have a failure. But then what happened now? The Arab Spring now, where people rebelled against the order, and where you have the regional orders that was destroyed, you have more intervention. More intervention, here I will speak by Russia, by Turkey, and by Iran. And more so, I would say, and this is what we are living today, from 2011 and onward, you have redrawing of maps and realignment of forces. These are the two things now happening in the Middle East. And let me explain them. What do I mean by realignment of forces? You have forces now no longer, I would say, oh, these Arab forces. No. For example, you look at Syria. What did you see in Syria? How many actors today in Syria? You have Syria, Bashar al-Assad, the Americans, the Russians, the Turks, and ISIS. So how many actors you have? You have 5 major actors. Now, when we look what's happening in Syria, yes, and I agree with Yossi. You know, they said, well, the Syrian government with support from Russia, became the winner. No, it's not the winner. Turkey now, and this is where I go and I speak about redrawing the maps. Do you think Turkey today is gonna withdraw from northern Syria? Do you think Turkey today is gonna withdraw from Idlib? Idlib today is the hub of Salafists. Whatever Turkey is gonna say about them is the hub for all of radicals, they are there. So here what you are now, you have the Russians, and you have the Turks, and you have the Iranians. Now Israel and United States, and mainly Israel, of course, doesn't want to create a scenario in Syria similar to that scenario that exists in Lebanon. Mainly, they don't want Iranian to create a state within a state that is mainly led by Iran and its Iranian Revolutionary Guards, especially Hezbollah. This is what's happening. Now let me move forward, and when I look at the Middle East. Now, we have problems. Yemen, Libya, Iraq, Lebanon, and Egypt. Egypt soon is coming, and I will speak about it. What is United States is doing? United States has focused rightly on Iran, but not rightly by focusing on Iran to the exclusion of all other issues in the Middle East. You tell me, and this became so apparent, and me, I knew it all along. So apparent was Bolton release of his book, was former officials that spoke about it. They say, well, and those people in the administration, they said, oh, we cared about the Kurds. No, you did not care about the Kurds, because when everything was out there, we know that the focus was mainly Iran and Russia. So yes, I am against Iran. Yes, I am against it. But mainly that policy of United States, first, is not connected to what we are doing in the global order, and then it is inconsistent in the Middle East. Now, let me mention to you something here, and I would like to ask you this question. Can you define United States foreign policy? Is it liberal interventionism? Is it isolationism? Me, myself, when I think about it, and I think about it most of the time, I cannot come up with a definition of our foreign policy in the Middle East. We wake up every day, there is something going on. Withdraw from Syria, support Lebanese army, no, not support Lebanese army, go into the peace process. The king is not happy, we have to speak with bin Salman. Bin Salman is not happy, let's do this. So mainly this doesn't work this way. What we took from US foreign policy, we took the consistency and we took the statecraft. The diplomacy, we took it out. Now, what's happening in the Middle East? You have many challenges. And I can tell it to you right likely from now. United States cannot resolve them. Because as I would say, as an American citizen who left the Middle East, you know, mainly when I look at the Middle East, I say, listen, I don't want really, you know, yes, I care about certain countries in the Middle East. I care about the people of the Middle East. And I feel sorry about the tribulations of the people of the Middle East. But also now, United States is at a also critical juncture in its lifetime. Really, United States, we have really contestation of global power. And in that contestation of global power, I see again, the administration is inconsistent. And how is this inconsistent? Because it's affecting our policy in the Middle East. I cannot be against Russia and against China at the same time and go after Iran. And I cannot pursue maximum pressure policy when the Europeans are not with me and China is there signing deals with them and Russia is supplying them with weapons. Who's gonna suffer the most? The people of the Middle East who are really rebelling against the order of their countries in the Middle East. And this is the tragedies of the Middle East. So mainly, and I am sorry to say that there is no real and near solution to the Middle East anytime soon, and United States can no longer resolve all this problem in the Middle East. But what United States have to decide? United States, from my perspective, whether the Middle East or rather the other area, as I look at the Middle East as part of the global order I mentioned to you, it has to decide between two things. Between, listen, we are going to be, again, the indispensable power in the world or the undisputed power in the world. And once you start looking at those, much is gonna be clear to what you can do. You have to define your position in the world now, where, listen, I was a student in the 1990s, and I looked at the world and I say, my God, United States. It stood, you know, really at a great hill. The hill that is bigger and shinier than the hill of Ronald Reagan. And now when I look at the United States in the world, I say, what's going on here? And this is a very short period of time, from 1990 to 2020. So we have to decide what kind of a foreign policy, and we have to define our position in the world. The Middle East, now let me highlight few issues so I can have a question. I know probably you want to ask me about Hezbollah and all these things, and I have all the inside information. This is what I would say. The US, first and foremost, has to reactivate its alignment with Europe, period. United States cannot go against Russia and China at the same time. You cannot make two of them enemies. It's extremely important. Second, United States, when it pursues its policy in the Middle East, I will give them one simple, very simple advice. Listen to the people of the Middle East. Listen to the people of the Middle East, period. Listen to the Iraqi, listen to the Syrian, listen to the Libyan, listen to the people, what do they want? They know better than what we would like to know or what do we know about their countries. Third, you know, press a little bit our allies, you know, to open a little bit the public space in the Middle East. This has been an ongoing thing. And then it opened a little bit really when? It opened with Bush in the second administration, with Egypt and Kuwait. And then with Obama, it was a little bit, I don't know, leading from behind. And then came Trump, and I'm sorry to say that, it's leading by the wayside. So we went from leading from behind to leading by the website. Now, another thing also it's important in the Middle East, prevent war. Prevent war, really. Look what's happening now with the Israeli and the Iranian, with Israeli and Hezbollah. As a matter of fact, I can tell you this, Israel is taking every precaution to attack them without triggering a war, because they know, because everybody knows in the Middle East now, the Middle East now today is a place of misery and tragedies. I can give you an example of my old country, you know, Lebanon. Lebanon today, you know, over 50% are below poverty level. 70% of the people, they have no money. It witnessed the biggest robbery of their money. You have money in the bank, you worked overseas, you came, they stole you blind. They stole you blind. Another thing also, other than preventing war, you pursue your policy, mainly, of course, fight ISIS. ISIS, really. And there's something. ISIS is not the only radical organization. You have so many of them. And really, when I look at the world myself, look at Idlib, look at Libya. Yossi spoke about it and wrote about it. Look at other areas. Look at the Sahel region. Look at the Philippines. Look at Central Asia. ISIS is really getting bigger, and all the Salafi jihadism are expanding. And this is where I think myself, you know, we have to have concerted effort to fight ISIS. And this is something we can work with the Russian and the Chinese. And another thing that where I really would like you to focus for United States, if I am someone to advise today United States, where the area? Yes, I would like Libya. Libya is a terrible situation, and Yossi wrote an excellent article. Libya is a terrible where we see, you know, Turkey is in, Russia is in, Qatar is in, Egypt is in. Libya is one of those countries that we need to work with Europeans to really to have to come sign of a stability there. Really, we have to, and United States have been, you know, really that started, we started with in Libya. We have no tangible presence there. And this cannot happen. Why is this cannot happen? I'll tell you why. Who is next door to Egypt? Egypt today, nobody speaks about it, but Egypt today is facing one of the most serious threats to its national security. Its national security is threatened by instability in Libya, by a country that has become now today, yes, the most populous, 100 million people. Many of them are below poverty level, and more so, they are threatened now by the Ethiopian dam. The Ethiopian dam, the Nile River that goes there and feeds or is responsible for 90% of the Egyptian people. So it's facing a huge threat, Egypt. And this is why it behooves us. It behooves Israel. It behooves any other that Egypt remain a stable place. And this, we have to be proactive in dealing with Libya, but also in dealing with Ethiopia. Second place, and I will go to Syria, Iraq. Iraq, I can tell you this. Iraq today, we have a good person. And I know the prime minister is my friend. I met him, I worked with him, I met him in London, we traveled together, we here in United States. Mustafa al-Qadimi is a very decent person, but also he's an Iraqi nationalist. And he wants to balance his relationship between Iran and United States. But he's not Iranian stooge like al-Maliki. It's not an Iranian stooge. And he did something where he really went after the Iraqi mobilization units. He needs our support. And I know United States has strategic talks with them. This should be a priority. And we should give him leeway and support him. Next, I'll go to Syria. Syria, let me tell you this, and I always speak about it, and I have here some of my students with me from Lifelong. You cannot resolve Syria without Russia, period. We have to speak with Russia. Even if some of our Congress people and this, you know, they unlucky. Listen, look at Israel. And I put an article, Yossi, I put an article in Biza, in the Begin Sadat Center. Early on, I told them it behooves Israel to talk with Russia and have a deal with Russia regarding the southern Syria. And a few months later, they did that deal. It's not a utopian deal, but you cannot discard, you cannot discount the presence of Russian there. So mainly I would like stability there, but I have to sit down with them. They have the Astana process. United States is not involved. So this is something United States should be involved. And the focus there, you know, if kicking Iran out, it's gonna be Israel is doing a good job in not allowing the Iranian to entrench their military presence there without triggering a war. So really what we need to do today, we need really to bring some kind of stability and face a transition to Assad out. Putin, he supports the regime, but his support of the regime doesn't mean that he is supporting Assad to remain in power. Then finally, you know, you have Lebanon and Hezbollah. I can tell the Israelis, my friends, whom I always considered my brother and sisters. And I studied there. Yossi, I was at the Moshe Dayan Center and my professor there was Asher Sasser.
Our friend.
yeah, so I can tell you there, I can tell you that you do what you do best. You have your own, you know, inventions. Your own economy now is 40,000, which is on a par with the best European countries. And I can tell you this when it comes to Lebanon. Hezbollah is in a deep, deep, deep trouble, very deep trouble. And more so, Lebanon as a country today is being tormented, is being, I don't know what kind of word I'm gonna use. Yes, you have sectarianism now between Sunnism and Shiaism is deep. And today, even, you know, even if I'm some Christian party, you know, the free current with Hezbollah, today everything is collapsing. Why? Because the people of Lebanon now can no longer handle this. And this is where I want to end on a good note. And what's a good note? So whatever happening now, when I see a ray of hope, I see, listen, today, yes, as Yossi said, the Middle East country were created as artificial state. But today when I look at Iraq, and when I look at Lebanon, and I look at the Iraqi and the Lebanese, and when I look at the Iranians, the people of Iran, not the government of Iran, I see him really, I give you an example. When one, you know, demonstrator wanted to bring, they were out and to bring Israel, they told them, don't bring Israel. Why are you bringing Israel? It's about, you know, life and survival. It's about life and death. So I can see that you have still in the Middle East a new generation. And this is what I say, if I want to support the Middle East for the United States, I want to support that civil society. The new generations that's taken the street and getting killed in Iraq, getting beaten in Lebanon, getting beaten and killed and imprisoned in Iran. This is where I'm going to support. But as the United States, I can tell you this, and this is where I'm going to end. I cannot resolve all these issues. I put my priority out, you know, and I want to work with my allies, even with my adversaries, not enemies, Russia and China, to find, you know, a path for that older generation to go away and for that new generation, which I think many of them are women. Many of them are women. Look at Iraq, look at Iran, look at Lebanon. Who's leading the demonstrations? Women in the Middle East. This is where I'm gonna have my hope for a better Middle East. And I thank you.
Okay. Steve, you wanted to say something?
No, go ahead.
No, okay,
Go ahead.
okay. So I think we heard two wonderful presentations. And Robert, I am with you. I mean, Robert and Yossi actually read the draft of the book, and I put a lot of emphasis on the Arab Spring and civil society. So I love that point of view, and I will ask you a question afterwards, Robert. But first, there are questions also that I can see here in the chat.
But maybe
And
if
Yossi, question for you. I would
okay.
like you to react to what Robert has said. And maybe, Robert, you want to say something about what Yossi said, although you did mention something in your presentation.
No, you
I
know,
agree myself with what Yossi said.
myself and Robert, we didn't coordinate anything, but a lot of his points were very similar to mine and mine to his, you know.
I agree with that.
It doesn't mean that we are too brilliant. He is brilliant, of course.
No,
Look,
you are.
Thank you very much.
You are.
Look, where I do take, not issue perhaps, but and also, by the way, with you, Luis, is I'm still very skeptical about this notion of civil society in the Arab world. And the reason that I say it is, look, what really is happening in Libya, and that's why I wrote my piece, exactly because Libya is considered to be so marginal, so kind of out of touch with the rest of the Middle East. What's happened in Libya in the last 9 years is so indicative of every point that I mentioned and Robert mentioned. And one of the points that I would like to emphasize here is, and then apply to the rest of the Middle East, is because of totalitarianism, authoritarianism, or any other of those, the fact of the matter is that in all of these countries, and be it Egypt and other countries as well, there hasn't developed a real civic society based on the existence of ideologically political parties that could mobilize masses. The only ones who really are genuinely popular in those countries are the Islamists. The Ba'ath Party in Syria has never been a mass party. It's never been. Or in Iraq, for that matter. All the parties that Nasser established, or Sadat later on, and then Mubarak in Egypt, were also a sham, as we know it. And when there were the only free democratic elections in Egypt, the Muslim Brotherhood won them. What can mitigate my point, which is leading to the conclusion that the Islamists are the alternative, as they call themselves, Islam al-Hal, in Arabic, Islam is the solution, is the fact that in Egypt, at least, they failed. The 1 year that Morsi was in power, he really demolished and destroyed everything that he could put his hands on. That's true. But when I talk today to Egyptian students in the US, including American Egyptians, Egyptian Americans, whatever we call them, they hate al-Sisi. They hate him. They hate him greatly. And they say everything is better than him. Muslim Brotherhood, yes. And it's being said by girls that would not put the hijab on and all that. So I still don't see the end of the Islamist fervor or, wave, if you will. And I can also tell you that if we talk about Iran and Turkey, about two countries which are gaining momentum and ground in the Middle East because of the question of religion. That is to say, we talk here still about the use of religious motivation as being a very significant, potent political, social, and cultural force in the Middle East, and we can't ignore it. The only other point that I would like to make, again, because I would like people to, make their points, to ask questions, is Robert specifically referred to Egypt, and obviously Egypt should have been mentioned also by me, but, I decided not to. For all kinds of reasons. Yes, Robert is absolutely right. Egypt today is the epitome of other problems in the Middle East, and this is the fact that when you have 100 million people living in Egypt, and the per capita income in Egypt is $3,000 or $4,000 a year, nothing, but nothing, unfortunately, can change it in a revolutionary, dramatic way. It could be $4,500 a year, it could be $5,000 a year. The country is poor and doomed to stay poor. What is to say? That is to say that we tend to ignore the fact that Arab societies, as they developed in the last 50, 60, 70 years, created some domestic issues, socio-economic domestic issues that are so significant, so devastating, that they really make me very, very pessimistic, because as much as I would love to help the Egyptian regime, and I am taking issue with those who say Sisi is terrible. He's not a nice guy, but what are the Muslim Brotherhood? Look, you don't have to choose between good guys and better guys. You have to choose between bad guys and worse, But the fact of the matter is that all we can do in a country like Egypt is to give them the Tylenol for one day or the Advil for another day. I don't see the basic solution here. Therefore, I still can see a lot of instability continuing to be in the Middle East. And it will continue to be a problem that in the end of the day, not just in the end of the day, but at any given time will also become a very big issue for Israel, because you can't look at your neighbors and how they fight each other and just stay behind. It doesn't work like that.
Yes, question for both of you, and you both. Yossi, you wrote a terrific article that is on the pages of the Palm Beach Center for Democracy it is about Libya, but in fact it's a lot about Turkey. And Robert related also to that article and related to the presence of Turkey. And Robert also mentioned the fact that, he doesn't see the Turks withdrawing from Mosul, and he doesn't see the Turks withdrawing from Idlib. How do you see the actions of Turkey? Something very symbolic recently was the Hagia Sophia, what they did with the Hagia Sophia Museum, turning back into that is, I think, more of a symbolic message, but I wonder whether there is a message there. Is Turkey the next Sunni Iran?
It's a tragic situation.
What are the dangers? How the American foreign policy is dealing with Turkey?
Turkey is a tragic...
still a member of NATO. And that, Erdogan actually was able to fool Trump with a phone call on the Kurds in northern Syria. I mean,
Turkey is a tragic
do
story.
we really understand Turkey?
It's a sad, tragic story. It is maybe the greatest tragedy that really befell on the Middle East when you look at the deeper, more profound problems of the Middle East. And this is the fact that, look, Turkey after revolution of Ataturk, Kemalism, Ataturkism, if you could call it this way, created the only Muslim country in the world that completely separated mosque from state. And that crumbled. That collapsed after 6, 7, 8 decades. That collapsed for all kinds of reasons, but it collapsed. So what you see in Turkey is not just the failure of Kemalism in Turkey. It may be, but what you see is the failure of the ability to create an Islamic alternative that would still be democratic and liberal enough to allow accommodation of the entire population into it. And again, I very, very briefly, because I have had Turkish students and I've become very friendly with them. I cannot forget a girl, never mind the name. She left class back to Turkey. She cried in public of the entire class and said, "You guys don't understand. I'm going back to Iran. I'm not going back to Turkey anymore." And this is 2020, 2018 or 2019 it happened. One word about American policy towards Turkey. Is there a policy?
Listen, Louis, I want to add something regarding Hagia Sophia and Turkey. Let's not forget something, that the policies that was pursued, you know, mainly the zero-sum policy, so they could restore, you know, the neo-Ottomanism has failed in the Middle East. Let's not forget that. And the foreign minister and the prime minister who really pursued that policy is out. What's making Turkey now act in this way? On the domestic issue, let's not forget, you know, they lost the municipal election in Istanbul. Istanbul, where, you know, Erdogan was mayor for many years.
And also Ankara, right? Also Ankara.
Yeah, but mainly he was the mayor of Istanbul.
That's correct.
And they lost the election there, you know, and the Hagia Sophia is in Istanbul, Louis. Second thing I would like to mention also, yes, I agree with Yossi. You have a religious factor extremely important, but the other one, and I'm looking at it now and I'm gonna put an article out. I'm writing it now. Turkey and Lebanon. Turkey has no place in Lebanon. Turkey now is making inroad, not only with the Islamist, with the Muslim of Lebanon. Why? There is no political authority. There is no Sunni political authority. They are legitimate. So mainly here, if you are a Muslim in Syria or in Iraq who are unhappy with the government, or in Lebanon or in Libya, if you want someone, a political authority, and I read them and I read their Arabic and on social media, they look at Erdogan not only as an Islamist, but as a strong Muslim political figure, because they are afflicted in their countries and you have a void of leadership in their countries. Lebanon is one of them. So Hagia Sophia, it has two factors. First factor for domestic purposes, you know, to burnish his, you know, his figure, but also, you know, to show that Turkey is a strong, and Turkey, you should, let me put it in another way where you can see it. When Jews look at Jerusalem, why? Spiritually and politically, they look at, you know, the wall. And I think that, Mr. Erdogan, would you like to create another Mecca there? But a Mecca of leadership. This is what he's trying to do. If you want to look at me. And he's having members. I know, listen, I spoke with some people from Tripoli that I knew. And the way they look at Turkey today, very different than the way they looked at Turkey yesterday or 5 years ago or 10 years ago. They are extremely unhappy with their leadership. And Erdogan is showing, and also there is something with Erdogan I wanna add to Yossi. Whether in Syria, whether in Lebanon, whether in Libya, yes, they are doing politics, but he's putting a lot of help through civil society organization. I could count for you today. You have over 40 Turkish organizations extremely active in Lebanon among Muslim among the Muslims, with no affiliation to the Muslim Brotherhood in Lebanon. So really, you know, and of course, let's not forget now, and he's being helped with Qatar. Qatar again is active. So mainly they are exploiting the misery of the Middle East, and they exploiting the void of political leadership in the Middle East. This is also, I would add to the factors that Yossi said of the religious factor, which I think is an apt argument.
Yeah. I'm going to ask my last question before I give it to the audience. And Steve, you can handle the questions of the audience. I want to say something about Iran and related also to American foreign policy. And Robert, I agree with you 100% that we don't have a policy in the Middle East except an Iran policy, but even that Iran policy doesn't look like it's not clear what it is either, at least not to me. Maybe you can clarify. But interesting, because we basically ended the agreement that existed, the so-called JCPOA agreement, the Iran deal, the so-called Iran deal, which, you know, we all agree that it was not a good deal, but we broke it. We put Iran under maximum pressure, but there doesn't seem to be any exit, any political exit. You know, Iran doesn't want to negotiate. You know, they are building what is called the nuclear arsenal. They are developing centrifuges. And lately, we are hearing that a lot of these, the nuclear plant actually exploded at one point, and people say that the development of nuclear capability has been delayed by 2 years. So is this the new war against Iran? Is this a new strategy to prevent Iran from becoming a nuclear power? Sabotage.
Are you asking me or are you asking Yossi?
I'm asking both of you.
Yossi, you want to go
start
first?
very briefly. Look, yes and no. Look, what's happening in Iran is a combination of three factors right now. There are the acts of local opposition elements, mainly ethnic opposition groups, Arabs in Khorasan, the Baluchis, the Kurds, maybe even Azeris. I'm not sure about that, or other minorities. There's no question about that. There is also the question of level of low motivation in Iran as a result of the terrible economic deprivation, mostly caused by the American sanctions, which lead to incompetence and laziness in all the countries. And there is, of course, the work of foreign intelligence agencies. You can imagine of what countries. I will just hear the defense minister of Israel, General Gantz, who is not a big talker, but he said, not everything that happens in Iran is related to Israel. Not everything, apparently some. But look, the problem about Iran really is that while we are fighting the nuclear program, they are still causing so much damage everywhere else. And the question is, what will come first? The Iranian regime will be brought down, and then who knows who will come after them? Or in the meantime, the damage they cause in some of the countries will become irreversible and create a web of new problems. And I can't tell you that I have an answer to you about all that, but I'll tell you that in the case of Syria, even though there is so much success on a tactical level to what Israelis do about Iran. For example, just 4 hours ago, there was a lethal aerial attack on South Syria as a result of the attempted penetration yesterday of a pro-Iranian group to Israel from Syria. So even that, when you look at all this and you say, great, it shows to you the depth of Israeli intelligence penetration in Syria and all that, and of course to the Iranian system. But then you have to ask yourself a very sad question, so what? The Iranians still do not show any sign that they are giving up on their program. That is to say, time factor is crucial here. What will come first? A breakdown of the Iranian regime, or a complete disorder in the Middle East caused by Iranian provocations? And I'll tell you what is the date to look at. The 4th of November. The Iranians are waiting eagerly to the results of the American presidential elections. They are hanging tough because they believe that Trump would lose and the new administration, and I'm not saying it because I'm pro or anti anything in America, I'm just saying they believe that the new administration will be better to them. And the question really is, will the new administration repeat the mistakes of the old one by allowing them to put aside for a while the nuclear program, but then intensify their other troubles in the rest of the Middle East? I'll leave it at that.
The old one, you mean Obama?
Yes, he was the previous
Okay.
administration. It's a fact.
Listen, again, very apt argument by Yossi. This is where I look at what, because I'm answering your question, Louis. This is what I worry about. The attacks, they are not by coincidence, all of them. If you look at the attacks, and I can give you the places, they deal with nuclear program, they deal with missiles, they deal with chemical programs. So mainly anything that deal with weaponizing, future weaponizing of a nuclear program, or with ballistic missile is being attacked. Now, this is where I worry myself, with this administration. This administration said, listen, we would like to change the behavior of the regime. But really, when I look closely, it's not about the behavior, about ousting the regime. And look at Bolton, he said it out. Look at other people, who only the guy who really doesn't think about ousting the regime is Trump. But I don't know if Trump is gonna be present during all what's happening. You know what I mean? So really, mainly when we speak about maximum pressure, and this is why I think some in the administration and some senators, here Tom Cotton, and here the recent statement by Ted Cruz. Ted Cruz openly said, he is on YouTube, he said, collapse of the regime. Now, this is where I come myself, as a student of foreign policy and at the Middle East. And I say to myself, Robert, take a look at the Iranian regime before its collapse, and at the Iranian regime today, and ask myself this speculative question, whether this maximum pressure without a war is gonna bring down the regime. And I can tell you this with confidence, it's not gonna bring down the regime. And I'll tell you why. Because they have the determination, Louis, to stay in power. Even if they're gonna lose 1 million Iranians or 2 million Iranians, they are determined to stay in power. And this is my issue myself, because I don't want this to lead us into a new war with Iran. Because it's very possible. Whatever people are saying, I saw that with Iraq. I saw the environment and the background in Iraq, and I see it here. Why I want to kid myself? So mainly the administration now is not working to change, is working to oust, and is being, I see the administration, not Trump really. Trump is busy tweeting and is busy with all these things with COVID-19. Really, United States now, facing so many issues domestically. So what I worry about, this could lead to a war. You know what I mean? And this is what I worry about. Now, the other thing is that this is where myself, I think, where you can do well, support the Iraqi, support Mustafa al-Qadhimi. Because listen, who is on the border of Iran? It's Iraq. It's Iraq, and the Iraqi, and where I did a lot of research, the Iraqi, many of them are Iraqi nationalists. So if there is a place of deterrence, I look at Iraq. This is how I stop the behavior of the regime. You know what I mean? By cutting its supplies. And of course, with the Russian and Syria. Regarding the nuclear program, I don't have a solid answer. But what can I tell you is that I don't think Israel, first, and second, United States will allow Iran to have nuclear weapon, period. Period. There is no question in my mind about it.
Okay, Steve.
Thank you,
Yours.
Robert. Terrific.
Thank you so much.
First of all, this is so interesting. We've run longer than we thought we would run, and it's just fantastic. But we have a number of questions that were emailed to me and then through chat as well. The first question, this is for Yossi, I would imagine. Alden Mayman is a former student of Professor Olmert at Tel Aviv University back in 1986.
Wow.
He is asking, why is no one talking about the prospect of returning land to Jordan instead of establishing yet another state in the region? Is this a viable option?
That's a great question. I mean, look, he was my student, so you know. Look, yeah, we didn't talk about many issues, but 2 points here to Alden and to the rest of the audience, the participants. First is pay attention that as a matter of nature, we don't talk about the Israeli-Palestinian issue. In the overall grand scheme of Middle Eastern issues, that's not the main issue now. It's an issue for Israel that's become a domestic Israeli issue. That's another story. About Jordan, I happen to believe, and I changed my mind about Jordan, I'll be honest with you. As an old revisionist, Zionist, I've always believed that Jordan was an artificial state. Jordan was stolen from the Jewish people after the Balfour Declaration. Okay. But then I changed my mind because Jordan has become maybe the most stable Arab country. In 100 years, only 3 rulers. King Abdullah I, King Hussein, and now King Abdullah II. In between, there was Talal, for 2 years, but he was mad guy, hospitalized in Turkey and all this. Look, what is the change now? I think that the two-state solution, as we understand it to be, is dead. The old two-state solution. There could still be a revival of the two-state solution if you don't consider, which it is, by the way. Jordan has to be included in the Palestinian solution. Jordan has to be included. Nationalism would have to find expression in parts of the West Bank, or Judea, Samaria, and in Jordan. The Jordanians cannot remove themselves when it suits them from the problem and interfere in it when it suits them otherwise, like they do in Mount Temple in Jerusalem and all that. So without getting into too many details, because we don't have the time now, I would say to Alden Maman, that's the name, and he's from Montreal, by the way, and to the others, that yes, Jordan, in my mind, and I'm moving closer and closer to this idea, should be part of the solution to the Palestinian problem, as it has always, by the way, should have been.
Terrific, thanks. Robert, any comments?
Well, as a matter of fact, I would like to say comment. One time King Abdullah said, and he was talking to Benjamin Netanyahu, he told him, listen, I am really, the last true friend of Israel in the Middle East. I know you have a lot of friends, but I am your true friend. And I believe the Hashemite of Jordan has always been good friend with the Israeli. Let's not forget, you have a lot of declassified documents in Israel. Before the establishment of the state, you have certain relationship. Then after the establishment of the state, you have certain relationship, good relationship. There is one thing that King of Jordan did that I would never forget myself. When he flew his own chopper to Tel Aviv and warned the intelligence and the prime minister then, and he told them, listen, the Arabs are preparing to attack. So which Arab leader did it? And also there is another thing. Jordan really, it's in the middle. It's a buffer for United States. It's a buffer for Israel and for Saudi Arabia. So from my perspective, I need the stability of Jordan. And I think the Hashemite, as Yossi said, yes, they are respected and they brought stability. And I would support them, always to have a stable Jordan.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I have, before I continue, if anyone has a question online, you can raise your hand. There's a little hand raising icon. Okay, now Dr. Berkowitz, Irving Berkowitz.
Irving is here.
Irving is here. Irving is
well, I'm very happy that he's there.
Just retired from Palm Beach State. He said, I would like both speakers to address the question, and and maybe you guys talked about this a little bit. I would like both speakers to address the question of how to go about rebuilding bipartisan support for Israel. Would also like to know if either really believe that retreat from sovereignty over Judea and Samaria will significantly restore democratic support for Israel.
I need to tell you something about that, and not to brag about that. In 2002, December of 2002, I had dinner in Tel Aviv with a senator from Delaware called Joseph Biden Jr. And I need to tell you, not because I'm going to either vote for him or not, he already at that meeting told the group of 3 Israelis, I was one of them, and there was also Senator Chuck Hagel, if you remember, from Nebraska, Republican, and the then American ambassador in Tel Aviv, Dan Kercher. It was Tel Aviv at that time, the embassy, not in Jerusalem, as it should have been. He told us, you are losing American public opinion where it matters, and he talked about the Democratic Party and the academic community. 2004-5, I wrote already all kinds of people cautioning them about erosion in that sense in the US. I think that Netanyahu made mistakes in dealing with the Democratic Party in 2017 when he was invited to Congress. He talked in March, if you remember. In January, I wrote an article in gift. That said, the Democratic Party has moved to the progressive side in a large way, and the fact that Speaker Pelosi is endorsing Tlaib and Omar and all the rest of them is very disconcerting and unacceptable to me, but you know, we need to bend over backwards, to dig into every possible place, to dig every possible hole, to do whatever it takes to restore relations with the mainstream of the Democratic Party, and giving up on the timing now of the annexation or application of sovereignty is one of them. The point is that, as usual, and I have to say, Israel is forced to make concessions because what seems to be outside pressure, as opposed to making its own right decisions as to what not to do without getting pressurized. Because now many Democrats would say, oh yeah, we pressurized you not to do this or that, you didn't do it, what do we owe you? We need to find imaginative ways to do it, and you in Florida are in a good place to do it because of the existence of a major Jewish community, but also how significant Florida would become in the upcoming presidential elections. I know that a lot of the people that I'm in touch with don't like to hear it because they say, oh, it's a lost case, the Democratic Party. If the Democratic Party is a lost case for Israel, we are going to lose US support for Israel, period.
Let me, he mentioned, you know, how it's happening tonight. I'm agreeing a lot with Yossi tonight. But let me add another thing.
Not a bad idea.
Let me add another thing. And this is where mainly, and I spoke about it in my lecture at Lifelong, you know, and at FAU and with my students. I think overall, the Israeli leadership, not the Israeli activists and others, they are a little bit disconnected with the Jews and others, especially minority in the Middle East, the new generation. And mainly, there is a lot of talk about the BDS. Yes, and the way they are going against the BDS, fighting the BDS is good. But also there is another thing that is somehow, you know, making more inroad than the BDS, especially with the younger generation, is the intersectionality, where social justice for one should be social justice for all, justice for one, justice for all. And this is where I think from my students and from I am not a Jewish, although I am a student of Zionism and a student of Judaism. So I think this is where, you know, there is that disconnect. The disconnect with the younger generation of Jews who happen to be, most of them, within the realm, the orbit of the Democratic Party. And this is where really you need to work with them, not against them, not refute them. You have to work with them. Listen, I teach the Arab-Israeli conflict, and I stand in the middle, and I tell you, listen, I use only primary sources. You know what I mean? And I'll speak about it as much as you like on primary sources. So mainly when you have the right on your side, don't worry about engaging with them. Don't worry about, you know, going and say, oh, listen, you are too far. Listen, I can tell you this. When I hear, and this is my student at Lifelong, and this is why I love this area here. When you had the people in the 1960s, and when I read, their parents were going crazy. Oh my God, this generation, they're gonna be all dopey. Well, they turn out not dopey. They turn out to be the best of the best. And this is where the connect really is with the younger generation, and not only Jews, the minority. And this is where if you can balance yourself without supporting one party, and you also said that, of course, the Democrats are gonna be upset if you're gonna speak and support the president and speak about him and not support the Democrat. Really, you have to have a balanced approach, Democrat and Republican. But at the same time, and this is for you, Irving, my friend, because you are in academia, and you have no idea how happy I am that you are listening to us. You have to make connection with your future generation. These are the new leaders. And those new leaders, they have questions. And you have to answer those questions in the most plausible way and engaging ways.
Thank you, Robert. Are there any questions? I don't see any hands up.
Excuse me, I can't find the hands up icon, but I just wanted to make a parenthetic observation about Nancy Pelosi. I wouldn't read too much into the fact that she gave support to Tlaib, Omar, etc. It is my understanding that she automatically gives support to any incumbent Democrat. And I think it has more to do with that than agreeing with their politics per se.
I'm not sure that I agree with you, and I tell you why. I checked it. She would give support to the Democratic candidate when it comes to the the November elections, but she gives them support now within their constituencies in primaries. And in the case of Omar, she gives support to somebody who is anti-Semitic to the core, whereas the opponent of hers, again, African-American and progressive Democrat, is the opposite. So by giving her support in a primary, and the same goes, by the way, to Tlaib in Michigan, she shows something that I, in the past, could not have expected her to do, because Pelosi and her family have always been great supporters of Israel.
Let me add one thing here. Palestinian and pro-Palestinians, you know, within the Democratic Party, they wanted to introduce something into the platform, you know, the new platform of the Democratic Party. Well, they refused, the Democratic Party refused half of them, and they said, we are going to listen to some. They refused them all. All the articles and all the issues that the pro-Palestinian faction within the Democratic Party that wanted to be included in the Democratic agenda, you know, they said they were all refused.
I also want to add to what Robert said, but just a few days ago, the House overwhelmingly approved the package of aid to Israel with overwhelming support from the Democratic Party, with a few exceptions. So I don't think the problem is the Democratic Party as a whole. It's just a few bad apples, if you wish.
No, it's beyond that, Luis. I agree with Robert. It's a generational issue. It's an ideological issue. I don't see it too much here in South Carolina. I need to tell you, it's a different Democratic Party. The leaders here, African-American, the mayor, Steve Benjamin, others are great supporters of Israel. They go proudly to AIPAC conferences, and they are, you know. But you hear it and see it in other parts of the US, and we can't ignore it, you know. It's not about blaming now who is responsible and who is not. The fact of the matter is that we cannot accept a situation whereby people like Omar will be accepted in the Democratic Party as much as I would have expected the Republicans to condemn and deny anyone that is anti-Semitic or racist of any other kind within their ranks. So from my perspective, it's not about Democrats or Republicans. It's about a set of values that have to become acceptable to the both parties in the US and cannot be violated. And supporting Omar in that case is a little bit too much. So as I said before to Perry Dror, I think that Pelosi here made a statement, but again, look.
Okay, I'm sorry if you're not able to find the hand to raise, but if you have any questions, you can unmute yourself or post it. If not, we've been going for an hour, 7:30, an hour and a half. Wonderful.
Even I saw just on the chat about Iran and China and about the deal, the $400 billion deal.
Okay.
As a matter of fact, I read much of it, you know, and it's ambiguous. It's still because the Iranian doesn't want to go and mainly give the Chinese a kind of say in the decision making in Iran, but also at the same time, you know, it's something that should not be discounted. It's extremely important, and this is why when I said United States, when it look at the Middle East, it has to take into consideration China and Russia today. And yes, China is going and doing that deal, and the more we are going to go against China and put China as an enemy, the more is gonna go and have, you know, better relationship with Iran and other countries in the Middle East.
Yossi, did you want to comment on
Yeah,
that?
I agree completely. I think that this deal is, you know, is a potential danger, of course. It can take Iran off the limbo and then save them in a way. But interestingly enough, of all people, you know, who condemned this deal, Ahmadinejad. Okay, so he's now in opposition to the current regime in Iran for God knows what reason, but he said what Robert said. And of course, he heard it from Robert, not the other way around, that you can't really give away sovereignty to another foreign power, you know, and the Chinese, they are not exactly the kind of foreign power that just comes and deals with you on the basis of understanding and sympathy. They have their own interest, but potentially it's a problem. But here in the case of Russia, by the way, and Robert, it brings me back to what you said before. I think the Russians are playing a double game about Iran as well. I don't think that Russia has any interest in seeing a nuclear Iran because they are on their borders. And there is an Islamic population on the other side of the border in Russia from Iran. So, and I don't want to go beyond that. I think that throughout the years, Putin, and not surprisingly so, has shown an ability to play double games. See, by the way, about Syria, the Russians today in South, I'm going to write an article about that to the center. The Russians are creating a new militia in South Syria, which is going to be the one that will fight the Iranians and Hezbollah there. Do they do it in cooperation with Israel? Officially not. Do they do it in cooperation with Israel? I leave it to your imagination.
Terrific. Okay. Does anyone else have any other comments? I don't want to close anyone out.
There are a few comments in the chat.
Well, many of those comments were to each other. It's one of the wonderful things about this particular event. It's so interesting. We're learning so much that people are discussing it in the chat, but I didn't see any specific questions to ask either of you. There's a side chat going on.
I see a lot of the chats, yeah.
Yeah,
One thing I wanted to say, and in reaction to the last point that Robert and Yossi said, I wouldn't rely on, China or Russia not supporting Iran. I think they are definitely competing politically and geopolitically with the United States. And whatever they can grab, they can grab. So I really see these deals with tremendous concern, and I don't trust that Russia will not support a nuclear Iran. You know, the fact that Iran is on the border.
I'm telling you, they will not. Period. They will not.
Maybe for the time being, but in the future, I don't know. I mean, at this point, I think anything can happen.
Well, yeah, it's always safe to say anything can happen because, you know.
Okay, so just one other last question you can throw into the mix is, I just saw it here, is Bibi safe? How safe is Bibi politically in Israel?
Yossi will answer.
Well, look, Bibi has been the longest serving prime minister of Israel. I have known him very well personally. I worked with him. And I have mixed feelings about him because, look, he has done a great deal of good. He has had 3 fantastic achievements that cannot be taken away from him. He restored Israeli economy in 2003. He has achieved a great deal in the foreign policy of Israel. And he also has developed the ability to connect, which is basically the second point, with a lot of countries, creating all kinds of interesting alliances for Israel. However, his time is up, and I wish him the best in all his legal battles. A lot of them are, by the way, are manufactured and would not come to court in the US. I think that he is living the swan song of his political career, but I'll go beyond Bibi now, and I'll say the following about it. The Yom Kippur War was the end of the Labour Party in Israel, because it broke completely the sense that even though it was the old Mapai, which was a benign dictatorship, they did whatever they wanted in the country, but they took good care of the security of the country, and we could trust them. The last couple of years could be the Yom Kippur of Likud. The problem really is that there is no alternative to Likud. When you look at the polls, you see something very interesting. Even if Likud is going down now from, say, 40 in the previous polls to 35 or so, the party that is close to them is having 15 to 18, you know, and the so-called right-wing parties, if you put Lieberman in, are even growing beyond 70 seats. The problem really could to prepare itself for the post-Netanyahu era, which behind the scenes is starting to take shape. And I would imagine that in a matter of few months, you will hear much more about that. So remember who said it to you first.
Thank you, Yossi, and we will certainly remember that you said that. And you're my hero when it comes to Israeli politics. So with that, we've ran quite a bit over. I'd like to thank Yossi and Robert for your incredibly informative comments and for the important work you both do for your respective institutions and for the Palm Beach Center for Democracy and Policy Research. I'd also like to thank Celeste Simon and the World Affairs Council for co-sponsoring this event, but most of all, I'd like to thank everyone in attendance. We had a record attendance, and without your presence and participation, of course, the center would not exist. We are a 501c3 nonprofit, so please visit our website at palmbeachdemocracy.org. And if you trip upon the donation button, consider the donation. And with that, I'd like to thank everyone for coming and wishing everyone a good evening. Thank you all.
It's a pleasure to be with you. Pleasure.
Thank you all, and good night.
Good night.
Stephen.
Be safe in the storm.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Louise.
Take care.